Tūkua te wairua kia rere ki ka taumata. Hei arehi a tātou mahi. Ma tātou whai ki te tikaka a rātou mā kia mau, kia ita, kia korea e karo, kia pupuri, kia whakamaua, kia tīna. Tīna, himie, huie, tāiki e. Kia ora tātou. It's an absolute privilege to be back with you again, to stand under the mana of that haka that you just all performed to our Lord, to the ariki a ihu karaiti. Kei te mihi tēnei ki a koutou katoa, ki a tātou katoa. Kia ora. So as I told you all this morning, I totally wasn't a Christian when I was a teenager. And instead, I was what you would describe as a badass. I was real naughty, when I was at school. Like, I was naughty in all the ways that like people think teenagers are naughty. Like, I used to smoke. Woo! And I mean like proper smoking. Like, I used to smoke like proper cigarettes. I know, crazy, right? Yeah. And there were lots of downsides, you know, the risk of heart disease, the risk of cancer. But worst of all was the smell. And not so much that I had smelly breath or I smelled like I'd be smoking. More like the smell made it really difficult to get away with having a sneaky cigarette in the toilets at school. You guys know what I'm talking about. This guy knows what I'm talking about. He doesn't, don't worry. He's like, it wasn't me, Mum! Anyway. It's not like these days. It's not like these days where you can just go into the bathroom with 8 of your mates and hand round like a real flash USB drive and come out smelling like strawberries, you know. Back in my day, it was hard. And so what I would do is I would sneak to this park across the road from my school, but this park was a bit weird because it was full of dead people. Most people call it a cemetery. And so I'd go over there. And so there was this one day that I was there and I was having a cigarette and I got a bit bored, and it was the middle of summer and the grass was quite dry. And down in Canterbury, the grass gets like this long and then it just goes brown and it's just totally dead. And so I thought to myself, do you know what would be a great idea? It'd be a great idea to light a small patch of grass on fire and then put it out with my foot. And so what I did is I'm like, little patch of grass on fire, and I let it burn for a second, and then I'm like, that was mean. And so I was like, I'll do another one. I'll let it get just a little bit bigger. So I light another. Don't do this, by the way, right? Do not do this at home. Do this at your friend's house. Anyway, so I light like another little patch and I let it get a little bit bigger, and then I go like that, put it out, and I was like, yeah. You know when you're doing something and you know it's the wrong thing, but at the same time you get like charged with adrenaline, you're like, come on. I was like, I'll do one more, and I'll let it get just a little bit bigger. And so I grab my lighter, I light a little patch of grass on fire, and I let it get to like this big, and it's getting a bit bigger, and I'm like, right, and I start to put it out, and then there's a gust of wind. And it goes from being like this big to like the size of this corner of the stage. It's like, and I'm like, ah! So I'm going around as fast as I can with my shoes, like hard out, trying to put this fire out, and it's not working. What starts happening is my shoes start melting. And so I start freaking out. I'm in my school uniform. So I take like, you know how school uniforms, they just have those woolen jerseys? You know those ones that when it rains, you start smelling like a sheep? You guys know the one I'm talking about? You're like, anyway, so I take my school jersey off and I start dragging it to like smother the fire, which actually worked really well. Until my jersey caught on fire, which I didn't realize. So I was basically just dragging a flaming jersey along really dry grass, at which point there's another gust of wind and the fire just goes, and I'm like, this is bad. And so I got to do something really cool. I got to call the fire brigade. I hadn't done that before. Called them, like 111. They're like, police, ambulance, or fire? I'm like, oh, definitely fire. Definitely need the fire people. They put me on the line. They're like, where are you? I'm like, oh, I'm just at the cemetery. It's really hot. Because it's on fire. And so they came and put it out. And that is one of the coolest school detentions I ever got. Yeah. I legit got a detention for burning down a graveyard. That was pretty cool. Thank you. It's not actually, that's not the detention I'm the most proud of. I once got a detention for having facial hair. That was the highlight of my life. You know, at your school, at my school, you used to have to be clean shaven. And one day my teacher came up to me and she goes, James, you've got a moustache. And I was like, really? Can you see it? She's like, yes, and gave me a detention. I ran around school. I'm like, I've got facial hair. I am a man, right? It was awesome. I once got a detention, true story, for walking like a clown. That is an achievement. It was less of a clown and more of a cowboy. I was trying to be a cowboy. The detention was for walking like a clown. Here's what happened. I walked into my year 10 maths class. I had a rivalry with this teacher. This is how the rivalry worked. I hated her. That's it. Anyway, so I walked into the classroom and it was just, you know that awkward experience when you walk into a classroom and it's just you and the teacher? And so you look around, you're like, come on, someone show up. No one showed up. And so because it was just the two of us, I was like, I started making my own theme music. I was like, do-do-do-do, wow, 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 do-do-do. And I start walking like this. And I looked at her and I go, Miss Dalwanen, there ain't room in this classroom for the both of us. And she turns around with her whiteboard pen and she points at me, she goes, James, sit down. I'm like, yes, you shot. I lay on the floor, I'm like convulsing, pretending she shot me. I was gutted that the detention said for walking like a clown. I was clearly a cowboy, right? Do you want to hear another story? Actually, one of my favorites is I got a detention. This is cool. For inappropriate clapping. Thank you. That is very appropriate clapping. I approve of that clapping. Notice, shut up. No, joke. No, stop. I want to show you what inappropriate clapping looked like. I was in this assembly and I was really, really bored. And you know how in assemblies it's like you clap and you clap. If someone gets a certificate, you clap again. Stop. I did this to myself. And what we are learning about is the power of the crowd. That's what I learned this day. What I did was I texted like 100 different people and I said, oi, if all of us go and sit on the field at 9 a.m. in the morning and we can convince another 10 people to come with us, then instead of going to class, we'll just sit on the field and there'll be too many of us for the teachers to give us detentions. And so they'll try and send us to class and they won't be able to. And do you know what happened? The whole school ended up sitting on the field. Don't do this at your school, your teachers will hate you. But the whole school ended up sitting on the field and the teachers are standing around us in a big circle and they're going, go to class. And we just go, you go to class. It was awesome. Why am I telling you these stories about being a naughty, rebellious student? 71 years before Jesus was born, there was a rebellion in the ancient Near East. There was a rebellion led by a guy called Spartacus. Some of you might have heard of him. What this guy did was he was a slave. He had no power. He had no rights. He was trapped. He was stuck and he got over it. And so what he did was he led a rebellion of 6,000 people who rose up out of their slavery to fight for their freedom. And they did pretty well for about a year and a half, at which point their freedom got crushed. And when they got beaten in battle, here's what happened. The Romans crucified 6,000 people on one day. See, we look at the cross now and we think, oh, that's such a nice necklace. But the cross to Spartacus and all of his slave friends meant something very different. Crucifixion was and is to this day one of the most horrific ways that humans have ever come up with to kill another person. The thing about execution is crucifixion is the point wasn't just to kill you. There were lots of ways to kill people. The point was to humiliate you. The point was to make it take as long as they possibly could for you to die, because by you hanging on that cross with nails through your hands, almost finding it impossible to breathe until you ran out of energy, and normally you suffocated because you couldn't lift your chest up to get oxygen in there. Sometimes it would take up to 3 days. Can you imagine 6,000 people crucified on crosses, slowly gasping for their last breath? All of them, the reason that they were executed is because they had slaves who had dreamed of freedom. When people saw those 6,000 escaped slaves crucified, those crosses sent a message. The message was this: you are powerless to change anything. You are enslaved now, and you will always be enslaved. Don't even dream of freedom. Now, why am I telling you this story? Why am I telling you this story about this thing that happened 70 years before Jesus was born, where 6,000 people were crucified? The answer to that is pretty simple, actually. It's because many of us in our modern world, whilst we are free, we are enslaved by stuff. Some of us are enslaved by our sin. Some of us are enslaved by our situation. Some of us are trapped by the stuff that has happened to us. Some of us are enslaved by feeling stuck and powerless to change our situation. Some of us have experienced brokenness and pain, and it still defines us to this day. We haven't been set free from it. We are still victims to stuff that has happened. Some of us have legit addictions. And often when we talk about addictions, we talk about things like drugs and alcohol. Yes, but man, some of us cannot work out how to stop looking at our phone. We spend hours and hours of our life consuming stuff that makes us sadder. I don't know what it is for you, if it's Instagram or TikTok, or if it's like pornography, or if it's just social media in general, or your phone in general. I don't know what it is that has enslaved you. I don't know what it is that has you feeling stuck and powerless to change, but I know that even though we live in a free society, many of us feel like we are enslaved by something. When Paul was writing to the Galatians, he had this incredible thing that he said to them. He said, you've been set free, but be careful how you use your freedom, because you can use your freedom in a way which will actually enslave you again. I want to read you a quote from what he said in Galatians 5. He said, it is obvious what kind of life develops when you try to get your own way all the time. Repetitive, loveless, cheap sex. He's like, that's what happens to the human condition. When we go our own way. No wonder we've got like a pornography epidemic in our country, in our world. No wonder so many people feel enslaved by that. He goes on, a stinking accumulation of mental and emotional garbage. If you've ever stood in front of a mirror and thought to yourself, I'm ugly, I'm too fat, I'm too thin, I'm too tall, I'm too short, I'm too pimply, I'm too whatever. If you've ever looked at yourself and hated yourself, you have a taste of what this mental and emotional garbage is that we believe. He says we have frenzied and joyless grabs for happiness. I don't know if you've been to a shopping mall recently. So often that's the experience. All of us have probably had that experience where we're in a shop and we're like, oh my goodness, if I had that thing, I'd be so happy. And then you get home and you put on those shoes and you realize that they actually don't go with anything else that you own. And all of a sudden this thing that made you so happy makes you feel so sad. It can't last. And then you go back to the mall again to buy something else to get a quick fix to make yourself feel better again. He goes on, magic show religion, paranoid loneliness, cutthroat competition, all-consuming yet never satisfied wants, a brutal temper, an impotence to love or to be loved. What happens in a consumer culture is you don't love someone and you're not loved. You consume someone and they consume you until there's nothing left except emptiness. I've been there. I know that. He goes on, divided homes and divided lives, small-minded and lopsided pursuits, and these last few, man, they stab me in the heart. The vicious habit of depersonalizing everyone else into a rival. Uncontrolled and uncontrollable addictions. The last thing he says is ugly parodies of community. Do you know what an ugly parody of community is? It's simple. It's when you're dying inside. It's when you're stuck, you're trapped, you're alone, you're anxious, you're depressed, you're heartbroken, stuff at home is falling to pieces, stuff at school is falling to pieces, you feel like your life is falling to pieces. And someone says to you, someone who genuinely cares about you, someone says to you, how are you? And you go, all goods. That is an ugly parody of community. And do you know what? The church is one of the worst places for it. And the reason is we feel like we've got to keep up appearances. We've got this like unwritten rule in church circles that you're allowed to be a mess when you first meet Jesus, but after that, you need to sort your stuff out. You're allowed to be a mess once, but after that, no, you're a Christian now. You've got to have it all sorted. That's rubbish. Seriously, do you know what a parody of community is? It's a community of people pretending that they've got it together when they don't. Jesus hasn't asked you to be perfect. He's asked you to return to his cross again and again and be set free again and again from all the ways that we go our own way. I know what it's like to have a part of your life that you feel like you can't control. I know what it's like to have a part of your life that you feel enslaved by. I know what it's like, no matter how hard you try, you still feel alone and you feel guilty and you don't feel like you can tell anyone about it, and so it makes it worse and worse and worse. I know what it's like to feel stuck. I felt stuck for years before Jesus set me free. And I've felt stuck since then, and I've had Jesus set me free again and again and again, because the invitation is to go back to him, to be reminded who you truly are, so you can be set free, so you can live as the person that you were created to live as, not as a shell of a person failing yourself and everyone else. We are not meant to be enslaved. We are free people. When you get stuck in those spaces, it is so easy for you to start to believe the exact message that the Romans were trying to send when they crucified people. And that message was this: don't ever dream of freedom. There is no hope of things ever being different. It's going to be like this until you die, and you are powerless to change anything. And that's why Easter matters. That's why the resurrection matters. Because the resurrection changed history. The resurrection brought forward the end of the story into the middle of the story and showed us that none of those propaganda statements are true, that everything is possible because Jesus is alive. This is good news. We believe that Jesus is the Son of God, God made flesh, or as the Message puts it, God became flesh and blood and moved into the neighborhood. I love it. God sent his Son into the world to rescue us from all of the ways in which we go our own way. So when Jesus was nailed to the cross, it looked like every single person who had been nailed to a cross before him. But when he was getting crucified and dying, he took all of my sin. He took all of your sin. He took all of our sin. He took all of our brokenness, all of our stuckness, all of our enslavedness, all the stuff that's happened to us, all the stuff that we've done to other people. He took all of it. And when he dies, it dies with him. His sacrifices for our sins, for our pain, for our addiction, for our hopelessness, for our slavery. The power of it dies with him if we're willing to accept his life. And when he was resurrected from death, the power of death was conquered too. This is the good news of the Easter story. It changed everything, and it still changes everything. Now, I want you to hear this. Before Jesus, a person hanging on a cross sent a message. The message was, don't dream about freedom. There's no hope of your life ever being different. It's going to be like this until you die, and you are powerless to change anything. But because of Jesus, we can look at the cross and we can dream of freedom. Because of Jesus, we can look at the cross and we can remember what Jesus did, and we can remember that he came to set us free, and we can literally receive and experience the freedom that he bought for us. Because of Jesus. Before Jesus, a person hanging on a cross sent a message that there is no hope of anything ever being different. This is your life, and it's always going to be like that. But because of Jesus, we can look at the cross and we can know that tomorrow does not have to be more of today. We can look at the cross and we can know that there is no such thing as a hopeless situation, because there is always hope, because there is always God, because Jesus was resurrected. There is no hopeless situations. Before Jesus, a person hanging on a cross sent a message. It's going to be like this until you die. And then that's the end of things. But because of Jesus and his death and resurrection, we can look at the cross and we can know that death is not the end of the story. Death is not the end of the story. Because Christ is risen. He's risen indeed. I love the Bible, but John 3:16, it's one of the most famous scriptures for an obvious reason, and it so succinctly puts the good news. For God so loved the world that he gave his only son, that whoever would believe in him would not die, but have eternal life. So the question that I have for you tonight, as we've been here at this Easter camp, telling this Easter story, talking about this good news, the euangelion, as the Greeks said, will you attach your story to it? Which story are you going to spend your life living out of? The story that says that there's no possibility of freedom, no hope, and that death is the end, or that there is freedom, there is hope, and that death is not the end of the story? Here's my invitation to you tonight. Will you let Jesus set you free with his resurrection-powered love? Will you let Jesus turn you into a person who brings freedom wherever they go? Will you let Jesus shape you into the person that he truly created you to be? Will you let Jesus set you free? Will you return to the cross over and over again to be liberated by Jesus, even though you're meant to have it together because that's what everyone thinks? You don't have to, because Jesus knows who you are, he knows where you are, he knows what you've been through. He has grace and love and forgiveness for your situation. And like the prodigal son, he will welcome you back with open arms every time, no matter how many times you return to him. It's good news. And will you return to Jesus over and over again and pick up your cross and follow him? Blue, do you want to join me on stage, mate? As I was thinking about this, there's this song that popped into my mind. Which I'm not going to sing for you. But it goes like this. Whakaria mai tō ripeka ki au. So eti atua. Whakaria mai tō ripeka ki au. Kia mātou. Reveal your cross to us. Help us to see the way that you not only transformed our lives and transformed our world, but you transformed the meaning of the cross. Whakaria mai tō ripeka ki au. The way that you transformed the cross from being something that represented death and hopelessness to life and hope. And Lord, may that cross transform us here tonight in the same way that you transformed it 2,000 years ago. May that cross transform us again this evening. Whakaria mai tō ripeka ki a mātou.